Welcome to the On-Premise IT Podcast, the only show that dares to be both on topic or on premise and on location sometimes or on premises. Each time we meet, we bring together a group of IT experts to discuss a single idea. On today's episode, sponsored by Dell Technologies, we're discussing cybersecurity and storage, and specifically whether security has to be integrated throughout the entire IT stack. But before we get into that premise, let's meet who's on the panel today. Pete?
Stephen, great to be here. I'm Pete Gerr from Dell's Cybersecurity Portfolio Marketing Team.
Hey everyone, humbled and honored to be here. Another phenomenal episode. My name is Girard Kavelines. You can find me on Twitter at @gkavelines, LinkedIn, Girard.Kavelines, and I'm the founder of Tech House 570.
Hey everyone, and thank you for having me. I am Enrico Signoretti, Senior Storage Analyst at Gigaon.
And I'm Stephen Foskett, organizer of Tech Field Day, publisher of Gestalt IT, and host of podcasts like this. So Pete and I go a long way back in the enterprise technology industry, and a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, storage was not really all that concerned about security. In fact, storage had pretty terrible security, and I remember people like us looking at it and saying, man, there's so many opportunities here for people to get in, people to change things, people to exploit. But over time, it got much, much better. And today's enterprise storage systems actually have a really remarkable set of security controls. And not just that, but they also have detection and mitigation systems built in like we've never seen before. So Pete, given this, does security have to be integrated throughout the entire IT stack?
Great to be back with you. And I would agree with that premise. I do think that we're at the point where security technologies, whether that's multi-factor authentication or others, do need to be built in or intrinsic in all of our IT infrastructure. And the other part of that, though, is that I think security operations or security management probably needs to become more centralized because our IT environments are so distributed and large today. It's not like 10 or 20 years ago where we had monolithic data centers that were much easier to protect. Right? Today's IT infrastructure is virtual, distributed everywhere we operate. So I think we need to look at it in both ways.
Well, I would like to add that from my point of view, there are two levels of security. On one end, we have the infrastructure security. I mean, we don't want anybody to mess up with our infrastructure, including storage. But on the other end, there is the data stored in the storage system, which is probably even more important from a certain extent, because even if you can mess up with the infrastructure, so you can delete, for example, my LANs or volumes, but you have the ability to mess up with my data. Think about ransomware, for example. That's not a problem. So there are different point of view, same stack, different approaches, and probably different tools.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, it's crazy too, coming from a more generalized background. I've seen it, whether it be a fleet of machines, the infrastructure storage, even so far as now we're expanding out into the cloud, right? I mean, threats are there, and it's an awesome thing that there's so many different types of solutions. It's EDR solutions, endpoint detection and responses that can give you real-time updates to prevent a lot of these things, because we know how nasty ransomware can get, and that's just to, tip the iceberg.
It does seem, though, that as more and more storage systems are adding, for example, protected snapshots or other ransomware mitigation techniques, that they're advertising them as sort of a one-fits-all solution. Like, hey, buy our storage thing with ransomware, and you're good. You don't have to worry about it. But I do not agree with that.
No, and the reason I say that is just like security software for a computer, right? We look at it from an enterprise level. There's so many different types of EDR solutions out there, and as I've mentioned before, one of them specifically, you have to actually train it. What I mean by that is you work specifically with the seasoned product engineer, maybe set up a few sessions and calls to tailor it and custom suit it to your environment. Because if you don't, you can't just throw an EDR solution out there and say, hey, it's going to work, because that's when it will start viewing the most harmless things, start ripping them out, start blocking ports, causing misconfigurations, changes on our infrastructure, routers, switches, APs, and so forth. So it's definitely not to just throw it out there and then just let it go. No, you really have to, find the right solution, right product that's going to fit your environment, and then, tailor from there.
Well, I have another point of view here. I mean, so there are two aspects again. Sorry, I always took in this analyst lingo with it depends, but actually you have the data that you are protecting, and some of the tools that are implemented in the storage system are easy to use now, are really easy to use. So it's a feature, and so you have a immutable snapshot. You have a lot of small functionalities that you can enable, and they just work. I mean, if the system was designed properly, so you can enable a lot of small features that just really help. On the other hand, there are some more complex processes and software. For example, data protection. I mean, your data protection software can have the functionality, but if you don't have somebody that knows what it does when it install the software, configure the software, and manage the software, then probably you can back up everything and send it to a I don't know, to nowhere, for example, slash dev slash now. And that's it. I mean, that becomes a problem. So, I mean, there is the easy part that some vendors are implementing on their systems, and there is the complex part. And they have also two different, not just two different approaches, but actually two different targets, probably, both in the internally in the organization and as they are used.
Just to make a couple comments, Enrico, I love the distinction you made earlier about data security and infrastructure security. And I think that point, that distinction is going to become more pronounced. I mean, frankly, no matter what business you're in, whether you're in the business of designing cars or manufacturing automobiles, data is your lifeblood, right? It's part and parcel of whatever business you are in. So, there's securing the systems that we use to create and access data is one part. Securing the data itself, though, is something pretty interesting. And because data itself is so portable today, right? We use it, we create it everywhere. I think security certainly needs to be intrinsic or built in. Maybe it's the security consistency. It has to be more consistently enforced versus being centralized.
Yeah, one of the, I mean, y- lately at least, I write a lot about data security as part of a larger data management problem. So you have to think about data management first, and with data management, you start thinking about creating more visibility, knowing your data, what maybe indexing it, and trying to think about your data as a single entity, huge entity. And then no matter if it's distributed, no matter if it's stored in different clouds, on premises, whatever. And then on top of this, you can think about data security because you have all the tools. You have the tools to understand your data, you have the tools to understand what happens, and then act properly.
Yeah, and I also think too, coming from a healthcare background, even prior to that, and this is unintentional. This isn't towards anybody. It's just I think a large amount of time what happens is now not every company or organization globally where I can have a dedicated centralized person just go, hey, let me look at the data, right? We go back to the old saying, jack of all trades, master of none. So what happens is, you're managing infrastructure, you're managing data, you're managing security, and somewhere in there, your perception and your perspective kind of slides away to other pressing issues at the time, and then sometimes that just something like that going to the wayside can cause a much bigger catastrophic problem. So I think it's just us being more diligent, right? Like it's great to have tools being in real time and kind of showing you and monitoring, hey, there's a problem, we just got hit with ransomware, but it's a matter of also how we respond to it as well. Like we need to be more proactive instead of reactive, because having it in real time is great, but if you don't recognize it, then it's not really going to make much of a difference.
There is also another aspect that is underestimated most of the time. So not all the storage is the same, and also the application that are accessing the storage. I mean, we passed the moment when human generated data is the biggest part of the data that we are managing. Now we are talking about also uh, machine generated for most of the part. And another aspect is that 90% of our data is now unstructured data, which is managed totally in a totally different way than unstructured data. So you have metadata for unstructured data, and so you have many more information on how to access and probably protect this data. So you can act differently. While instead, if you have your block storage, this is just a line, a volume, something that is protected as a wall. So it's different approaches, and maybe on the top layer you have the same tools. I mean, so we talked about the integration, so end-to-end integration, and maybe from the top end you see everything, as data. Okay, but in the end you have to you need the ability to dig into it, understand, apply policy differently, etc., etc., etc. So there is another layer of complexity from my point of view.
Yeah, it becomes too, you can take all that data, but data is very generalized. Where is the data coming from? How do we create, just to piggyback off your point, where do we take those custom policies and set them, from the top down?
And I also think, we collectively, vendors and users and customers, have created this patchwork almost intentionally, right? I mean, we as customers of IT optimize for performance and flexibility and cost, right? We pick a certain vendor because of features or because of cost or because of performance. We don't necessarily pick a certain vendor because of security or that they've built the most secure systems. And so we've sort of been on this explosion of IT and across multi clouds, as you pointed out, Girard, over the last dozen years or so. Security has been a bit of an afterthought, I think, to a lot of people. The priorities have been faster, more, sooner, and oh, by the way, cheaper, not more secure. And I think we're all kind of waking up to the fact that the cyber criminals have not stopped. They've continued to get better.
Well, I think this is changing. I mean, talking with my clients, yes, faster, better, whatever. Actually, the differentiator now is no more faster. I mean, everybody has an NVMe, everybody has good management tools. I mean, everybody, also all the vendors have their 10 million IOPS somewhere to show to somebody. So now the things are changing. Security is top of the list of any kind of conversation, and of course data management is another point that just a couple of years ago was yes and no, they didn't know how much data they were managing where, but now it's one of the first questions. So now they don't know where the data is, and they want to understand where the data is, what the who is accessing it, why, etc., etc., etc. So it's the conversation is totally different. I mean, so if you want to differentiate yourself as a vendor, you have to talk differently to the user. But the users at the same point are maturing and they want to understand more about their data, not just the storage itself.
And I think it helps too, again, from working in different spaces and whatnot. And we talk about enterprise today, it always goes back, at least a portion of it, to the user, right? Like clicking that email, make that one machine on your fleet that's on the network, that's all it takes. And just like that, you're hit. And I think what's great is, and I've done it personally, and running campaigns, right? Like that's what I've seen more the last few years, running phishing campaigns and running things to educate a lot of the users, because it's so easy to click on something. So if we educate them to the basic things, it won't be overnight, right? Like I don't expect them to be like how to break down the data. That's why we're the experts. But what's nice about it is if we can educate them on even the smallest things, that helps us and everything go a much longer way, I feel.
And so I think that my concern, though, is that if we all agree that the secret to security is to basically reach the applications, the end users, the business, storage doesn't traditionally do any of that. Storage is traditionally, locked in the basement, metaphorically speaking. And that's why I was always skeptical when storage systems come out with capabilities sort of in a vacuum. My opinion is that it is much, much more important, even more important than exactly what those systems do and what capabilities they have, that the capabilities are something that can be used and exposed to up the stack. And that's why I thought of this premise, honestly, because in my opinion, I just feel like storage is pretty much the wrong place to try to rely on security capabilities. Yes, they should be implemented there, but they need to be used and activated and integrated far up the stack by people who know what they're doing, people who consultants and people who work with the business, people who work with users and the business units to make those features useful.
And just to go with what you said, you had said it maybe a few minutes ago, you'll get an EDR solution, right? Or something we integrate into our environment, and they'll be like, oh, by the way, we have the storage piece. And more often than not, they don't implement it. They don't utilize it because again, you get so sidetracked, and that's key. That's why, as you said, if you have those consultants, to make sure to educate, because again, you may have extra features that we're not utilizing and we're not leveraging to the most of our advantage.
Well, I mean, to your point, Stephen, also storage is important to have the entire stack protected or secure, because, every system, when you look at the reliability of a system, is the less reliable component that makes the reliability of the entire system. So attackers, bad actors, they know where to find any weakness of the system, so they will attack there. If storage is weak, then this is the first point of attack. It could be an administrator password like admin. Yes, when they try it, they will try it. So again, we need two-factor authentication just to access the system, but also on the upper layers, we need all the necessary security features to avoid data tampering of all sorts. So again, we need total integration, yes, but I think also we need to understand that we have to secure all the stack. So and even how the storage talks with the rest of the world, it's important.
Yeah, agree with everything that's been said. It's interesting. Security is one area. I don't know that I can think of another in the IT ecosystem. Security is really an area where the old cliche of people, process, and technology really come together. You can't really do security at scale with just people and technology. You can, but to Gerard's point, large enterprises or even small to medium businesses or one person shops, all I have to do is click on that email, that ransomware, and their data, regardless of how large the organization is now a captive. So yeah, it's really challenging to teach proper security hygiene at scale, or even on a small scale today, when so many things are distributed.
One thing that happens to me all the time is that when I talk about data security, it takes me a few minutes to let them understand why we are talking about data security. So many organizations are still thinking about the perimeter, but actually, if you are experiencing a ransomware attack, it means that the attack has started months before. So what did they do in these months? Did they steal your data? Did they, use the data, copy the data for and sold it in somewhere? So the only asset that is really important for your company today is the data. You can buy a new array. I mean, but you can buy your data back. So yes, there is a ransom, but again, if they made a copy of everything, so, in the end, I think that again, it's important to evaluate all these aspects. And still, many companies think about the perimeter, so the infrastructure, more on the about the data. While actually, the problem is, again, twofold. So we have to think about all the aspects of data infrastructure.
And to wrap that up, is one thing I love, one of my many loves, just to touch on it, is this is why among other reasons, I fell in love with automation, because the more I could automate, then it drives me back to that point. Okay, so I haven't looked at this, not me personally, but if we haven't looked at this, okay, if we can automate X, Y, and Z, let's shift our focus back to, okay, implementing better, like as you said, security, hygiene, better products and solutions that could aid us with this, and then really tailor it to our environment better. So the more we can automate that, at least my opinion, the more we can automate, the better, the more focus we can have on the bigger task at hand.
I totally agree. I mean, I think automation, orchestration is part of that, and also things like machine learning really are giving administrators, operations folks a leg up especially against cyber threats, because of one of the points Enrico made is the volume of data, and Stephen mentioned it. Yeah, whether it's human created data or machine to machine data is just far too much for us to actually overlook anymore, manage anymore.
Yeah, one other thing that we have to take in account is consistency across platforms. So again, if you think about, okay, now I think about security for one system in a way, and for the other system with totally different tools and totally different methodologies, it becomes a real, mess. So it's become complicated. So you have to find something that, on top of everything, make you, apply policies on a, in an automated way, and gives you all the tools to think about your storage state in the same way. Then not everything works in the same way, but actually you have to you have to apply whatever is possible to all your storage system, to all your storage asset in the same way, and have similar information, so you have similar reports and everything. So this is why you have to build the platform, or you have to have everything integrated, not only vertically but also horizontally. I don't want to make it too complicated, but actually I hope I explained it well.
So, Pete, one of the things that I'd like to ask you actually is you're somebody who's been working with a lot of companies on this question. Um, how does it come out in your discussions when you're going to companies and talking to them about their security posture and how they can address the many serious demands that are on them about ransomware protection and endpoint just how do you deal with this?
It's a challenge. So, Dell being such a large provider, we develop and deliver and sell and support any kind of IT infrastructure, from laptops to storage to everything. Um, but our customers, whether they're small and medium businesses or governments or large customers, are all struggling, sort of how this discussion has gone, with where to start. They've all modernized their data center to some degree. Maybe that's been their storage environment. Maybe it's been their data protection environment. But regardless, ransomware in particular, in terms of attack vectors, has really been top of mind for folks, because it's a bit insidious as a user, right? It's very low risk for the attacker, very low cost in many cases, very low risk. If they don't get a hit, they go to the next potential victim. But for users, as you mentioned, it's very high risk. So customers are looking for a few things. They're looking for consistency. Um, that is both at the micro level, so building security into systems, whether it's a server or a storage system or an array. Um, Root of trust at the silicon level, right? We need to be concerned about our suppliers as well, and our supply chain. So it goes well beyond the technology. So ensuring that security is built in, and then ensuring, I think, to all of your points, it's enforced consistently, and we have a consistent set of tools across the IT ecosystem. We're not there today. I don't think any vendor is there today, because part of the reason is this patchwork that we've built. We've picked best of breed if I'm a customer, and that is usually from multiple vendors. Um, I think another interesting development is the other end of this, which is the regulators. You know, Healthcare, financial services, the traditional regulated industries is kind of where compliance and regulatory issues started. Today, we're seeing things like Sheltered Harbor, which is an initiative in the financial services industry, but it really defines how an organization has to protect its data and also has to be able to recover its data. So I think, there's also some impetus for governments, nation states, et cetera, to set some better standards around data security, and how, all of us are really holding on to data, right? Those of us who are protectors of data or users of data have some responsibility in that as well.
I was thinking about another thing. I mean, we usually think about the cloud and our on-premises stuff, but actually, with everything you're saying, especially when you talk about regulators, think about healthcare. The edge in healthcare is something huge, okay? Because you have more and more of these small ambulatories, hospitals everywhere. They have their local infrastructure, a lot of storage. They are creating medical images, everything. I mean, and they have to store it locally for access, and then to replicate it remotely for archiving or whatever. So, and they have to keep it forever, etc., etc. So a lot of issues, but actually these are the brings the security problem to another level. I mean, and the same goes for probably many other organizations. So you have now remote access of users that are working from home more often than in the past. So again, your storage system yes. So we have some regulation and everything, but actually it's the before regulations comes the common sense of the enterprise, comes the fact that you have to impose a security posture that is different from 2, 5, 10 years ago, and that's in general something that everybody has to think.
That's a really good point, Enrico, because of course the applications and the infrastructure that we're using today is very different from what traditional data center was. And so rather than talking about sort of the classic three three pillars of data center infrastructure, we're talking about software as a service. We're talking about platform as a service. We're talking about multi-site, multinational. We're talking about applications that span data centers and span clouds. All of this changes the security posture dramatically.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, so many of my clients are planning to move like 40 to 60% of their data center to the cloud in the next few years. But this doesn't change much because the data center is shrinking, and probably it will shrink even more because the edge. So you're moving some stuff out to the edge to because all of the issues that we have to move too much data between sites, and so what you create at the edge probably stays at the edge, or at least part of it. And then you have all these SaaS application, everything that could come to it. So the your entire infrastructure is much more distributed than in the past, and this creates something. And we didn't touch on the data governance, for example. That is another big issue, but it's again part of the security discussion, because you want to be sure that your data stays where you want it to stay. And of course data governance brings the question of compliance. And so again, and sorry, I'm repeat myself here, saying you need a data management to think about data security, and data security is key for a good data management.
Yeah, and I just want to wrap that up with my point, which to keep it short and sweet. It's being in the healthcare space for 6 7 years. I was educated to a lot of things and saw, we could the horror stories be here forever, but having PCI compliance, being HIPAA compliant, the data, how to segment it, and you look, we got, there was, having small breaches. I mean, there was a hospital locally that got hit. It's a real thing.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, that was sort of circling back to one of my earlier points. It was easy 20 years ago to protect the data center when the data center had 6 walls, right? Today, there is no perimeter. It's everywhere. IT is everywhere. Data is everywhere. And therefore, security has to be everywhere as well. I think both built in and also external as well from a management perspective.
So I guess getting back to our premise, does security need to be built into the entire stack? I'm kind of feeling like there's an it depends answer, but I'm also kind of feeling like it's more yes than no. Enrico, what do you think?
Yes, at any level, both vertically and horizontally. As I said at the very beginning, infrastructure is is a part of the security that you have to care about, but also the data side of things, the business side of things is another very key element of your security strategy. That said, I think that again, integration between the components and having a platform for data management allows you to build a better data security strategy as well.
Yeah, coming from a security guy, and I'm going to say it's not something we could just throw at. It's not a one size fits all, but without question, it does need to be implemented at every level. And I'm talking, as you said, from the infrastructure level of the business to how if there's a physical building in a location or a co-location, how you get through the door, because that's just how I view it. But yeah, we need it. We need it at every level, especially with the newer threats that are arising and are happening as we speak.
I totally agree with you guys, fellas, as well. Security's got to be built in, not bolted on, but it also has to be holistic in a sense, regardless of how an organization chooses to run their environment.
Yeah, and also I'll just add one more thing, and that's that things are changing and the infrastructure is changing, and it's very easy to let this stuff sort of slip through the back door if you don't aren't aware of what the modern state of your enterprise and your applications looks like. And so make sure that you're looking at things regularly to check and see if some of your valuable assets are outside the walls and using different infrastructure than you may have guessed. So thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great discussion. Before we go, I want to give you a chance to let us know where can we connect with you and continue this conversation. Pete, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Stephen. So with Dell, you can search for Dell Security Solutions anywhere you'd like. And for me personally, you can find me at Pete Gerr on Twitter and also Pete Gerr on LinkedIn.
So, as I said, I was definitely honored to be here. I love talking security, all things infrastructure. You can find me on Twitter at @gkavelines, LinkedIn, Girard.Kavelines, and I'm the founder of Tech House 570.
Yeah, you can find me on geekhound.com or any social media, LinkedIn or Twitter. The easiest way is to search my name on Google, because pronunciation could lead you to the wrong account.
And as for me, you'll find me at these podcasts here with Gestalt IT, along with other podcasts in our weekly news rundown. I'm Stephen Foskett, publisher of Gestalt IT. You'll also find me at the Tech Field Day events. If you enjoyed this discussion, please do share it with your friends and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And while you're in your favorite podcast application, also look for our Utilizing Tech podcast as well as our weekly IT news rundown. This podcast is brought to you by Dell in association with GestaltIT.com, your home for IT coverage from across the enterprise. For show notes and more episodes, go to GestaltIT.com/podcast.